there's a joke. If you get on an airplane and you don't feel like talking to the person sitting next to you, tell them you're a physicist. But if you do feel talkative, tell them you're an astronomer, and they'll get right into it.
It took your breath for a minute.
Yeah, I was like, and then I was like, oh my God, this is really happening. And before I knew it was over, it was sad. This is crazy. This is so nuts.
I'm Letitia Ferrer.
And I'm Chris Alexander.
And this is Totality Talks, the solar eclipse podcast.
It just took my breath away, the whole thing. It's really cool that you can see the corona and you see the sun kind of spewing out from behind the moon. It literally took our breath away.
A lot of people said overrated, but that was like
Not
one of the
overrated.
coolest things I've ever
Not
seen.
overrated.
Welcome back to Totality Talks. Things are starting to get a little bit crazy out there. Have you seen the meme where PhDs demand to be called doctor? Well, in this episode, we chat with Tresch Fienberg, astronomer and science communicator. He talks about his journey from JPL to Sky and Telescope and on to the American Astronomical Society. He's now retired and serves as head of the American Astronomical Society's Solar Eclipse Task Force. Trained as a professional astronomer, he remains an amateur astronomer at heart. Rick joins us from his private observatory in central New Hampshire. We welcome to the podcast, Tresch Fienberg. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
So can you tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from and professional career and all that stuff?
Sure. So I grew up in Los Angeles, California, and I lived there until I went off to college. I went to college in Houston, Texas at Rice University and studied physics there. And then I went on to Harvard University for graduate school. At the time, Harvard had a really good reputation. It's not as good today. So I got my PhD in astronomy, at Harvard. Now, growing up in LA, it's really, really horrifically light polluted today. It wasn't nearly as bad when I was a kid. And I got a telescope for my 12th birthday. And coincidentally, this was 1968. I also, became aware that the Apollo program was about to send astronauts to the moon for the first time for Apollo 8, also 1968. I started seeing teasers for a movie called 2001: A Space Odyssey. And I discovered a nonfiction book about astronomy from Isaac Asimov. And all of these things happened within about 6 months. And by the time I turned 13, I knew that I was going to be going into space in one way or another. So my first real introduction to the space program was I happened to be wandering through the physics department building at Rice University in 1975 or early 76. And I saw a poster advertising a Viking undergraduate internship with NASA's Project Viking, which was going to be landing a couple of spacecraft on Mars for the first time. And I applied for the program, and I got in. And I don't even know if I realized it at the time, but one of the people who had founded this program, this internship program, was Carl Sagan. So in July of 1976, I spent the whole month at the Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena working on the Viking Mars mission and getting to know Carl Sagan and a whole bunch of planetary scientists, which was great. When I got back to Rice for my it was a wow. I was in the control center when the first Viking lander landed on Mars. One of the great things about this internship was that even though we were undergraduates and we were just interns, we got the all access badge for JPL. There was no building that we couldn't go into. And so, we were all in the control center during the landing, which was really exciting. We saw that first picture of the surface of Mars come in real time with all the scientists and everybody. It was just amazing.
That is a big wow. I mean, I'm sorry. That is just wow, 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 wow. To have done all that. And how old were you at the time when all this happened?
I was 20. It was the summer between my sophomore and junior years in college.
Oh my God, that is awesome.
And the other great thing about it was I met some really interesting people. One of whom I'll come back to later, led me to my lengthy career at Sky and Telescope. So where am I? I'm in 1976. Okay, so I get back to Rice, and I'm studying physics, and I need to pick some kind of project to get involved in so that I can do a senior thesis. And I get myself attached to a project that's building a sounding rocket payload to study the aurora borealis from Alaska. And so I spent the summer between my sophomore and junior years, and then also between my junior and senior years, back at Rice doing, building this payload. And I learned my way around vacuum chambers and all kinds of laboratory equipment and all kinds of tools. And that was really great because a lot of that stuff's come back to be useful to me as a homeowner. I'm not afraid to start ripping into equipment, dismantling things to figure out what's wrong.
So you can fix your refrigerator. Is that what you're saying?
I haven't had to, but I've fixed a lot of other things. I've fixed my snowblower, and I've, fixed leaks, and I've, various other things. So we launched this rocket from Alaska, but as the lowly undergraduate on the program, I didn't get to go to Alaska, which was too bad. But I did get to do the preliminary data analysis. We were measuring, the particle flux of the aurora and the magnetic field and the electric fields and all that kind of stuff. And I got to process all the data and write the first, preliminary report of what our flight had found, which was really interesting and fun for me. But I had never seen an aurora. But the guys who I worked with, they brought back lots of nice pictures of the rocket launch and of the aurora. And eventually I did get to see auroras, but not until much later. Then I decided to go to grad school in astronomy. And when I was there, this was in the late 70s, early 80s. And although infrared astronomy today is very, very well known, because of the Webb Space Telescope, if nothing else, at the time, it was just beginning to come into its own. And I wanted to get into a field where there was a lot of opportunity. So I found the guy who was planning to develop some infrared cameras and got hitched up with that project. And that was Giovanni Fazio at Harvard. And he ultimately became the principal investigator of the infrared array camera on the Spitzer Space Telescope. And I was working on an early, not exactly a prototype, but an early version of an infrared camera that would take the first infrared images instead of just scan a single little detector back and forth across the source to try to map it. And I actually helped write or contributed to the proposal for the infrared array camera. But I ended up deciding about 2/3 of the way through graduate school that while I enjoyed doing research, I really enjoyed writing and teaching more. And I had been doing some writing and teaching while I was a graduate student. And I figured, well, maybe I could have a bigger impact if I work in public outreach and education. So that's how I ended up veering off of the research track and into what I ultimately have been doing for the last 3.5 decades.
So I really appreciate it because I find a lot of the stuff that you've done, I've been just absorbing as throughout the years, chasing eclipses.
And eclipses is just a part of it.
I know, it's just a part of it. You've been doing space and Sky and Telescope and everything around it, but This is the only part I can handle because it's day astronomy.
Yeah, daytime astronomy. Well, I always tell people, every telescope you own, and of course, if you're really into astronomy, you own a whole bunch of different telescopes because they all have different purposes. You got to have a solar filter for it because otherwise you can't pursue your hobby except at night. And so I've got solar filters for all my telescopes. But I want to come back to the Viking mission because there's a connection between my summer at Project Viking and my transition to Sky and Telescope after graduate school. And that connection is through another undergraduate intern who I met while I was there, Andy Chaikin, whose name you might know. He wrote the book from A Man on the Moon, which became, I think it was an HBO miniseries, and the book's been reissued on various anniversaries. And what happened was Andy was working at Sky and Telescope while I was in graduate school, and I didn't know that. He was in Cambridge and I was in Cambridge, and I just didn't know that. I should have known it because I was looking at Sky and Telescope, and I must have seen his name in there. But anyway, one day he called me up because he had been given my name as a person who could answer some questions. I don't remember what the subject was, but he was editing an article, and he needed some questions answered. And somebody at the observatory told him, well, you can talk to this grad student, Rick Fineberg. And he recognized my name. And when he called me, I recognized his name. And we discovered, that we were just a few miles apart. So let's get together for lunch, right? And so we got together for lunch in Harvard Square one day. And he told me he was going to be taking a leave of absence from Sky and Telescope to write this book about the Apollo astronauts and the moon missions. And I asked, now by this time I was still a grad student, but I knew that I wanted to get into writing and teaching. So I asked him if they were going to replace him at Sky and Telescope. And he said he thinks so. So long and short of it is a year later, I was working at Sky and Telescope.
That's awesome.
and it was thanks to finding out about this opportunity from Andy, this kid who I hadn't seen in 10 years, but who I'd met at JPL. And so, yeah, it's pretty neat. And then if you want to really fast forward, after my 22 years at Sky and Telescope, I started working as press officer at the AAS, the American Astronomical Society. And one of the last things I did while I was still working there was bring up the idea that the AAS should buy Sky and Telescope when its former owner went bankrupt. And so ultimately, Sky and Telescope became owned by the AAS, which I was working for at the time. So my whole career has kind of come full circle. JPL led to Sky and Telescope. Sky and Telescope eventually led to the AAS, and now Sky and Telescope is part of the AAS. Nice. I still talk to Andy from time to time. It's pretty amazing.
Awesome. That's an amazing story. And that's we were talking to Kate Russo, and she brought up the whole concept of Ikigai. I know I'm pronouncing it wrong. You probably have to redub it.
I think it's Ikigai or something like that.
Ikigai.
So I'm an Ikigai. So I'm an
you
Ikigai,
are an Ikigai,
right?
You're an Ikigai because you actually get paid to do stuff that you love. Like, I'm not getting paid to do all the Eclipse stuff.
Yeah, well, I'm not anymore either, but I was in 2017 when I was still working for the AAS. But yeah, I mean, I looked it up, Ikigai, because I hadn't heard of it before. And it talks about a sense of purpose, a reason for being, a motivation, that kind of stuff. And yeah, I mean, as I've said for years, I feel like my role professionally is to share my passion for all things astronomy and cosmic with anybody who will listen, because we have a real advantage as astronomers in that the general public and basically everybody is interested in it. There's a joke. If you get on an airplane and you don't feel like talking to the person sitting next to you, tell them you're a physicist. But if you do feel talkative, tell them you're an astronomer, and they'll get right into it.
That's true.
So, yeah, it's true. So, I mean, I enjoy, well, like I said, even in grad school, I discovered I enjoy writing and talking about astronomy, teaching about astronomy, more than I even enjoyed doing astronomy. But you can see I'm sitting in the warm room of my observatory. So I still do astronomy, but I do it now, the observing part of it as a hobby, as opposed to a profession.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
If you have questions about food and farming, check out Ask a Farmer. We share information about Canadian-grown food from dietitians, food experts, farmers, and those involved in the agriculture industry. Explore how your food is grown and raised and get useful information to help you make confident food choices at the grocery store. I'm your host, Clinton Monchuk, a Canadian farmer. You can listen to the Ask a Farmer podcast on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
So I think I first met you at when you were doing outreach for the 2017 eclipse back in like 2014 or 2015 at one of those
2015 probably.
One of those solar eclipse conferences. And then now I see you have seen you been doing those same conferences for this eclipse, except now you're volunteering.
Right.
So
yes,
that's the whole thing.
Well, yeah. So when it averages out. When I was doing it in 2015, in the run up to 2017, I was an employee of the AAS and I was being paid a full-time salary, but I was being paid a full-time salary to be the press officer. And I was organizing press conferences at the semi-annual meetings, and I was pushing press releases out every day and answering media questions and all kinds of other things. And on top of that, I basically did a second job, which was all this Eclipse task force work. So I was getting paid for one job to do two, and now I'm being paid for no job to do one. So, whatever. I said I would do it, and I'm doing it, but I have to admit that come April 9th, I will be very glad that it's behind us, because I will have been working on solar eclipse planning and safety and trying to get the North America excited about this kind of event for a decade, and that's enough. That doesn't mean I'm going to stop going to see eclipses, because the other thing I do is lead tours. And I'm leading a tour for April 8th. I'll be on Sky and Telescope's Mexico eclipse cruise.
Good.
We have a group of about 300 people or so, and a really interesting cast of speakers, a couple of astronauts, including one who serviced Hubble, a number of exoplanet scientists. So that'll be a lot of fun. But the people always envy me when I tell them that I've been to 14 total solar eclipses, and I've always been, a tour leader. So I haven't had to pay my own way, and I've, given lectures on the trips. But it's a lot of work. So I don't want to keep doing tours all that much longer. I want to just start going for my own fun,
Well, tell us about your very first solar eclipse, and then perhaps if it was a total, to tell us about your first total solar eclipse as well.
Yeah, so I know I saw partial eclipses growing up, but I wasn't rabidly enthusiastic about it at the time, and I don't remember my first partial solar eclipse, but I definitely remember my first total, which was the big one in July of 1991, the longest totality of the 20th century. And that was my first tour with Sky and Telescope. We went to Baja, Mexico.
That was my first one too. It was a lot
of people's first one, because it was the first one to come, that close to the continental U.S. in a long time. It was also visible from Hawaii, so a lot of people went to Hawaii. You didn't need a passport to go to Hawaii. You did need one for Mexico.
Actually, no. Back then, you needed a driver's license.
Oh, really? Is that true? Yeah, I don't recall it. But in any case,
at least from Texas. you just got on a plane with your driver's license.
Yeah. Well, that's neat. Yeah, if you live on the border, right? So by that point, I was living in Boston, so I don't remember because we flew. But in any case, so 1991 was my first, and it's the longest one I've ever seen because it's the longest one. There hasn't been a longer one since then.
No.
And then, so I've been to 14 in total since then, plus a couple of annulars. And I've been clouded out twice, which is a disappointment. But, it's given that a lot of people never see one at all, and then the next largest number of people probably see just one. I can't complain because I've been to 14 and I've seen the corona 12 times. So obviously I always want it to be clear, but I also know that I'll get an opportunity to try again if I get clouded out.
Of those 14, which one was the hardest to get to?
Well, I have two ways I could answer that. The one that was the longest trip was probably 2016 when we flew to Darwin, Australia, which is already a long trip. And then we got on a cruise ship and went to parts of Indonesia that tourists don't generally go to. Several of the islands we visited on that cruise had never had a cruise ship stop there before because it's just, it was completely on the other side of Indonesia from Bali and Jakarta and the places that, people usually go. So that was a really, really long trip in terms of the travel time. The cruise itself was, I think, a couple of weeks, which is typical. But it was the most exotic one, I think. And both my wife and I still feel that was probably the best of our Eclipse trips so far. But the other way I could answer it is if you want to look at cost per minute of totality, amount of time spent per minute of totality. It was the 2005 eclipse, which was 31 seconds in the South Pacific. And the cruise that we were on to see that was the longest cruise I've been on, 3 full weeks. So 3 weeks for 31 seconds of totality.
Yes.
It's pretty amazing.
I think you were on the big ship out of Tahiti, right?
That's correct. We were on the Discovery. Yeah. There were some smaller ships that also.
I was on the smaller ship from the Galapagos. It was 4 days out and 4 days back on a ship that really was kind of an island hopper and not really ocean going.
Yeah, is that the one that had the really rough seas? And I heard about that trip. Yeah. Yeah. The terrestrial version of the vomit comet, right?
Yes, it was. Although I have an iron cast stomach, so I had no problem.
Well, the only time I've ever gotten sick on a cruise, it wasn't an Eclipse cruise. It was a South Atlantic crossing where we went through the Drake Passage coming out of Argentina. And it was just once. I've been on some pretty crazy cruises. I was on a Russian icebreaker that went to the North Pole. That's not a lot of rocking and rolling. That's a bunch of pitching up and pitching down as you break the ice. But that was a really exotic and exciting trip. And we saw the eclipse, off of Novaya Zemlya, which was pretty neat.
What year was that one?
That was 2008.
Okay.
That was my last. Yeah, that was the last time I led a Sky and Telescope tour because I retired from Sky and Telescope shortly after that one and switched over. I taught for a year at a private high school, and then I went to the AAS.
Okay. Yeah, because 2008 I was in China, so you went over to the Russia side of it. Okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah. These days, I don't know how many people would be interested in going to Russia or China, but
China, I'm actually okay with.
Yeah.
Russia would be. Russia's still. I don't know. I'm hoping things settle down by the time we get another one out there.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I went, the trip to the North Pole was out of Russia. And I went to China for an International Astronomical Union meeting. And I had a fabulous time. The thing is, science is a great field to be in for international travel because it's cooperative and you make relationships and you don't talk politics, right? You talk science and you talk education and you talk public outreach and you talk mysteries of the universe. And it's a lot of fun and everybody's in it for the same reasons. So, I met locals and I ate local food and all that kind of thing. And it was great. So, I wouldn't want to be in the diplomatic corps right now, I don't think, and go to those places.
Well, we can transition into the coming event of April the 8th, 2024. You said you will be out on a cruise ship.
That's right. We'll be observing the eclipse near Mazatlan.
Yeah. So did you want to ask Letitia about some of your questions? Or?
Sure. Well, I mean, you've been working with the AAS for a while. You did the 2017 conferences leading up to it, and then 2024 now as a volunteer. But how hard do you think it is just to get the message out? One, about the beauty of the eclipse. That's the one message I feel like it's not really getting out. But ice safety also.
Yeah. Well, on the first point, we really are trying hard. That is, all of us on the task force trying really hard to convince people that you really should do everything you can to get into the path of totality. It's only 115 miles wide, but it's thousands of miles long, and it stretches from Mexico to eastern Canada. So there's lots of different opportunities, and most of the country lives within a 1 day or 2 day drive of the path. Now it's a Monday, April 8th, so people will be working. A lot of people will be going, kids will be going to school. So it's not like, a weekend more people would be able to go. But if you can get into the path, the point is that the experience inside the path is so different than the experience outside the path. We really want people to understand that. In 2017, that message didn't seem to get across. And in retrospect, I feel that I've identified what the problem was. And that is that a lot of people use a phrase like 50% totality or 90% totality. And even in the aftermath of the 2017 eclipse, NASA asked the University of Michigan to do a survey of the American public and find out, what people did, how many people traveled, where they went, what they thought of it. And you could tell from the language of the survey that a lot of respondents thought they were going to get more totality by going closer to the path. Whereas you get no totality until you're in the path. So a lot of us are trying to get that message across this time, that there is no such thing as any percent totality other than 100%, and
right.
Anything short of that is not a total solar eclipse and will not be spectacular and will not cause a great amount of awe and wonder and tears of joy and that kind of stuff. So we're working on that. I've gotten a lot of media that I've talked to understand that now and understand that they shouldn't write any percentage of totality other than 100. They can talk about a 50% partial eclipse or a 99% partial eclipse, but nothing like no percentage with totality other than 100.
I'm trying to get that word out too, and it's really difficult. Yeah. But my problem is I'm just trying to get people, because I have a job that's pretty intense. I'm in telecom, and it's an intense industry. I'm just trying to get people to get off the phone and go outside.
Yeah. I know. Well, when you're out, out and about, it's really something. Right? You just see people sitting there looking at their phones wherever they are, sitting on a park bench under a tree, on a sunny day, looking at their phones, instead of looking for the sound, for where the bird sounds are coming from. They may not even hear the bird sounds.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we try to emphasize is how many different wonderful things happen during totality that don't happen when you're only in the zone where it's a partial eclipse. So obviously the star of the show is the solar corona. It's this beautiful otherworldly light, unlike any other kind of light on Earth. You can only see the corona during a total solar eclipse. It's this beautiful thing with tendrils and wisps and loops and streamers. And then there's the, this velvety black new moon blotting out the sun's bright face. It's a different black than you see anywhere else, It's just so amazing. And then the sky around it is still blue, and the contrast, the black, the white, the blue. Well, there's also red, because especially on April 8th, when we're near solar maximum and the sun is very active, there are going to be probably prominences jutting out from the limb of the sun all over the place. That was certainly true at the April 2023 eclipse in Australia. I didn't go to that one, but the photos were spectacular.
The photos are great.
Yeah.
I reprinted my book to put the photo up here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Chromosphere and prominences were fantastic. I'd never seen one that short, and it just seeing that around the edge for so long, and it was only 58 seconds where we were at. But
that was the thing that was so beautiful about the 31-second eclipse that I saw in 2005, was that the chromosphere was visible virtually throughout the 31 seconds of totality.
Right.
And all of that color, and it's just the most intense color. And planets, bright planets in the sky. On April 8th, we're going to see Venus and Jupiter on opposite sides of the sun. And then, that's what's happening above you. But as Kate Russo, who you mentioned before, likes to say, totality happens above you, around you, and within you. The around you part is all of the other people who you're with, which with the emotional reactions they're having. Some of them are standing there with their mouths open, silent. Some of them are crying. Some of them are shouting or going woo woo. That's one thing. And then maybe the animals, if you're anywhere where there's animals or birds or insects or plants, they're acting like the sun just went down. And so you're witnessing all this, dusk behavior of different kinds of life. But the most dramatic thing, just in terms of beauty, is the sunset colors all around the horizon. You're standing in the middle of the moon's shadow. You are in an absolute straight line with the moon and the sun, which by itself, you have to stop and think for a second and realize, wow, I'm on a direct line to the moon and the sun. But also outside that shadow, which is, on April 8th, anywhere, at least 60 miles away, roughly 60 miles away, it's still light. And so you've got sunlight coming in from the horizon. And so it's reddened the same way it is at sunrise and sunset. And so it's just, intensely gorgeous. And then all of the things that happen right at the beginning and right at the end of totality. Bailey's beads, when the last little bits or the first little bits of the bright sun poke through the deep valleys on the edge of the moon. The chromosphere, which you mentioned, this thin middle layer of the sun's atmosphere. It's hotter than the sun's surface, but it's not as hot as the corona. It glows with the brilliant, hot pink or magenta red of the hydrogen atom. When the sun is a very, very, very thin sliver, often you'll see these so-called shadow bands. They look like little snakes slithering on the ground. It's basically this solar crescent twinkling. And the challenge of totality, and the reason so many of us want to keep seeing more and more eclipses, is that these are happening above you and around you with such rapidity and on so many different scales. The horizon all the way around you, the sun up in the sky, planets some degrees away from the sun, people around you, animals, and so on. You can look with your naked eye, you can look with binoculars, you can look with a telescope, but you can't do all those things at once. You can't look up at the sun and at the horizon at the same time. So I think I've seen every phenomenon that there is associated with a total solar eclipse, but I have not seen them all at every eclipse because it's simply impossible.
Yeah.
Whereas a partial eclipse, I've heard some people describe it as watching grass grow or paint dry. The moon moves slowly across the sun. It never gets very dark. And, you just take a look every few minutes and it's, you can detect the motion of the moon across the sun, which is cool, but, you have to use solar filters. You never get a chance to look with your naked eye. And you never get all these amazingly beautiful phenomena of totality. So it's worth getting into the path if you can. Getting closer to the path gets you a deeper partial eclipse. But again, for most people, even like a 3/4 partial eclipse, the sun's 75% covered. If you didn't know it was happening, you might not even notice.
I had several of my friends for the annular eclipse that came through Texas that stayed in Dallas. They didn't come down to annularity, but they were like walking their dogs, and so here it was like 95%. They didn't realize it was happening till it was almost that 95%. And then they went, oh, right. I got glasses from Letitia. Let me go run back to the house and get them.
Yeah.
But you don't notice anything until you're getting to that 95%. And even that's because, when the moon starts to move across the sun, it takes an hour and a quarter roughly for the moon to move fully onto the sun. For most of that time, the sun is still insanely bright, and your eyes have time to adjust. It's a very slow change. It's a very gradual change, and your pupils will dilate, and you won't even notice that you're basically, your eyes are compensating for the change in the brightness. But your eyes can't compensate effectively in broad daylight beyond about that 3/4 point. And then in the minutes that remain as you're approaching totality, the bottom drops out and it feels like it's just gotten pitch dark, even though it's really only twilight dark. But it's because your eyes can't adjust that fast at the end, right before totality. But so most people would never notice an eclipse was happening, at least up to that 3/4 point. Right. Because of pupil dilation. And then beyond that, they start to notice, but it's subtle. It's very subtle. Even at 99%, it's really still about as bright as a overcast day. It's still very bright. It's
daylight. Yeah, it's broad daylight. Yeah. You wouldn't think, ooh, something weird's happening. It's just like an overcast day.
I have another question. Eye patch or no eye patch?
Well, okay, so what you're asking is, should somebody who's in the path of totality wear an eye patch over one eye so that their eye will get dark adapted? And then when totality hits, that eye, at least, will be sensitized to be able to see the very outermost streamers of the corona. So I tried it once, and I didn't like it. I am very sensitive to differences between my two eyes. I have to get a new prescription when either one of my eyes becomes ever so slightly different than the prescription that I got for it, because I just am so sensitive to it. So for me, it doesn't work. I can't have two eyes that are behaving very differently. It's too strange and uncomfortable. Other people have sworn by it. I've seen a compromise where people wear red goggles, which they can keep on while they're, during the partial phases. They don't block a whole lot of light, but they block enough of it. And because they're red, they block the blue sky pretty well. So that gets you part of the way to dark adapted. But, for me, I usually take pictures while I'm looking. And so my pictures will capture more of the corona than I can see with my eye. But binoculars make so much of the corona visible that it's like, why would I want to do this to my eyes? I just use low power binoculars and I can see way more corona than anybody who's just looking with their eyes.
That's good information for us. That's very good.
And I do use low power binoculars during totality. I use high power binoculars. I bring two pair. I bring the higher power ones, 15 power, for the partial phases, because it's fun to watch the sun gobble up sunspots and things like that. And I can do that at 15 power pretty well. But once totality hits, I use 8 power binoculars because I want that wider field and I want to be able to really see the corona without over magnifying it.
That's great advice for somebody this is going to be their first time.
Mm-hmm.
Just to use the lower power ones and only during totality. Filters on for the partials.
Right. I always bring a filtered pair of my 15 power binoculars. I have filters for.
Okay.
I don't have them for my 8 power. So I use the 15 power during the partial phases, and then I pick up the 8 power without the filters during totality. And that for me works great. But if I did only have one pair of binoculars, I'd make sure I had solar filters for them that I could pop off during totality.
That's great. So you went through at the Solar Eclipse Conference in San Antonio, and you went through a great presentation about the coming annular eclipse, where you went through the brightness and the scaling of how far the brightness changes and how we won't go that far down during the annular, but during totality, it drops like 1,000,000 times or something. Can you give us without the aids, visual aid?
Sure.
That,
Here's how I like to describe it. What's happening is the sun is getting covered. And so before the eclipse, you've got 100% of the sun shining. By the time, and then when the sun is 50% obscured by the moon, you've got only half the sun shining. So there's half the light. By the time you get to 99%, you've only got 1/100th of the sun shining. But the sun is so bright that it still feels like daylight. Okay, so that's why I say 99% is not totality. It's still bright out. Like I said before, it's only about as dark as an overcast day. But in that last minute or so before totality, you get to 99%, then you get to 99.9%, and then 99.99%, and then 99.999%. And so you are literally getting more than 100 times fainter in that last minute. It's taken over an hour to get down to 1%, but now you're going to get at least 100 times fainter in the last minute. And because, again, your eyes can't adjust that fast, it feels like it just suddenly got pitch dark.
Yep.
But then over the next few minutes, your eyes begin to adjust a bit, and you realize, hey, the sky's still blue. I can see some bright planets, but it's not dark enough to see a bunch of stars. You're not going to be picking out constellations. I misunderstood that before I'd seen my first totality. People told me what to expect. And, the stars and planets come out. I thought, wow, that's going to be cool. And for my first eclipse, the sun was in Gemini, so I thought, wow, I'm going to get to see Orion in July. But no, I couldn't, because it doesn't get dark enough to see anything but the very brightest stars. And unless you're looking at the sun and your eyes are focused at infinity, you can't see any stars near, in the sky. The only time I've ever seen a star in the sky during a totality was in 2017 when Regulus, a first magnitude star in Leo, was right next to the sun. But I've seen bright planets because they're, large negative magnitudes, Venus and Jupiter especially, and I've seen Mercury once. But you don't see constellations unless you decide to get yourself dark adapted beforehand with a patch and to look away from the totally eclipsed sun. But why would you do that? You've only got a minute or 2 or 3 or 4 to look at the totally eclipsed sun. You can see those stars any other time, right? So I don't waste a lot of time looking for that.
So do you have any plans for 26, 27, or 28?
Not yet. I had thought that I wanted to go to Spain for 2026, but then I heard, that it also goes to Greenland and Iceland. So I'm thinking about that. 27, Egypt. I definitely want to go to that eclipse because my first eclipse was 1991.
Yes.
And as you know, there's a cycle of eclipses called the Saros cycle, where every 18.6 years, you basically get the same eclipse again, but it's in a slightly different part of the world. Well, it's a third of the way around the world, and it's at a slightly different latitude. So I saw 91 and I saw 2009. Those are the same Saros. And 27 is the same Saros. So I definitely want to see that. And then if I'm lucky enough to live to 89, I will see the 2045 eclipse in the US, which is the same Saros as the 1991, and I will have completed the cycle all the way around.
I'm so excited. It's going to be my third Saros. My first third Saros will be the 27.
27, right. And that's called, I think when you've seen 3 in the same Saros, that's called an exoligmos. I don't know what that word means, but yeah.
It's Greek.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's Greek. That's good enough for me. But I really would love to complete the cycle all the way back around to seeing it in the US in 2045. Now, my dad lived to 90, and 3 of my grandparents lived into their 90s. So I at least have a good shot at having that kind of longevity. and even if I have to be wheeled out, out of a nursing home or something to see the 2045 eclipse, I really hope I get to see that. That would be good. But I also want to come back to another question that Letitia asked a few minutes ago, which was about the safety messaging. There's 2 aspects of the safety messaging. The first is just making sure people understand that you definitely need eye protection to look at a solar eclipse, except that you don't need it if you're in the path of totality during totality. There are still people who have the misconception that you wear eclipse glasses to watch an eclipse, and that means a total eclipse too. The problem is that eclipse glasses are more than 1,000 times darker than regular sunglasses, and if you try to see the corona through eclipse glasses, you will see nothing. So you have to take off your eclipse glasses. You don't need solar filters on binoculars or telescopes or cameras during totality, and that totality is only as bright as the full moon, so it's perfectly safe to look at. And there are no harmful rays coming at us during an eclipse that aren't there on any other day. So there's nothing particularly dangerous about it. So that's the easy part. The hard part, for me anyway, is that is the market for solar eclipse glasses and handheld solar viewers has become a jungle. In 2017, there were essentially 3 manufacturers, 2 in the US and 1 in Germany. And it was, and we had this new standard, the ISO 12312-2 international standard, which had been adopted shortly before the 2017 eclipse. And so all you really had to say was buy eclipse glasses that meet this standard. And there were only a few manufacturers, and they all had their glasses tested and shown to be consistent with the standard. And so it was pretty easy to tell people what to do. Until shortly before the eclipse, when all of a sudden, a whole bunch of Chinese manufactured eclipse glasses started showing up on Amazon, and we didn't know if they were safe or not because they hadn't been tested. And it was too late to get them tested. So in 2017, I came up with the idea that I would put on the Solar Eclipse Task Force website a list of all the vendors that we knew were selling glasses that had been properly tested. And it seemed like a good idea at the time until the number of vendors that I needed to list, and these were primarily dealers reselling American-made glasses from the 2 American manufacturers, that the number was going up very fast. First there were half a dozen, and then there were a few dozen, and pretty soon there were 200, and it became a nightmare of just trying to keep on top of how many places were selling known safe filters. But it worked in the sense that it got a lot of publicity, and there were very, very few reports of any kind of eye injuries in 2017. that was the good news. The bad news was that a lot of people who bought Eclipse glasses on Amazon at the last minute realized that they might not be safe. And so they threw them out and they didn't go out and look at the eclipse. And that's not good.
Yeah.
That's sad, right?
Yeah.
And I was especially upset to hear that a number of schools had this problem where they bought glasses on Amazon at the last minute. And then their principal said, well, you can't use those. They might not be safe, so we can't let our kids out to see the eclipse. And so that was a missed opportunity.
I had a couple of schools post on Facebook about that, and I had enough glasses to give them so they didn't have to be without.
Yeah, but so that was a big deal when that happened, and for my efforts, I was very grateful. NASA gave me a medal, for my efforts to keep the public safe in 2017.
That's awesome.
The Exceptional Public Achievement Medal. And so that was neat, but it was really hard to figure out how to deal with this influx of glasses from China. Well, fast forward, it's now 2022, 23, 24, and there are now a handful of better known Chinese manufacturers of eclipse glasses, and they've been getting their glasses tested. They've been shown to be safe. I still have a problem, though, because there are still a lot of vendors buying from factories that haven't had their stuff properly tested. And if one of those vendors wants to get on our list of safe sellers and they can't prove that their manufacturer has had their glasses tested by a proper lab, I tell them, well, if you want to get on the list, you've got to pay to get your glasses tested here in the United States by a properly accredited lab. And a number of resellers have chosen to do that, and so they've gotten onto our list. But I'm still working on a few Chinese factories that I know have not had their stuff properly tested to get tested. And what I'm discovering is reassuring in that I am not seeing test results of imported glasses that show a failure to be safe. I'm finding a different problem, which first raised its head in 2017 and we thought was solved, but clearly wasn't, which is that some of the imported glasses are being printed with claims that they are made in the U.S. and even that they were made by a particular U.S. company.
Ooh,
and so it's forgery, it's counterfeit, it's fake. But because a number of those glasses have been independently tested by their resellers, like I said, I have not seen any test reports that show these glasses to be unsafe. But I don't want the public giving their hard-earned cash to fraudsters, right?
Yeah.
I agree.
So now I have to vet at two levels. I have to make sure that any vendor who gets on our list is selling safe glasses, but also that they're not misrepresenting their products as being made in America when I know they're not. And the other thing that people are claiming that is not true is that their glasses are approved by NASA. So I've been working down my list, contacting every reseller, and if they mention that their glasses are approved by NASA, I say, okay, I'm going to take you off the list until you fix that, and then I put them back on. But my list is long, so I haven't gotten through all of it yet. So I know there's still a few people, still some sellers claiming to have glasses approved by NASA that are probably still on my list, but I'm working through the list, and pretty soon there won't be any of those. And I finally decided that because the number of sellers just keeps growing, and I need to get ready for the eclipse, right? And I'm maintaining this list. So I put a cutoff on it. I said, from T minus 2 months, I'm not going to add any more. And so
I just squeaked
it's now
by.
Yeah. I'm still adding a few if their manufacturer requests it, but any random reseller, and certainly the ones on Amazon and Etsy and Temu and eBay, I just can't do it. It's impossible. So, but we have so many vendors on our list, and many of the people who are selling on Amazon or Etsy or Walmart or other online marketplaces are selling stuff that is made by people on our list, that there's plenty of choices. The last thing anybody needs to do is just Google Eclipse glasses and buy from the first thing that pops up. There's so many choices that we have vetted and that we know are reliable. It's better to buy from those. But I really don't want anybody to panic if they bought from a seller who's not on our list. I don't want them to think, well, my glasses therefore must be unsafe. No, if they're not on our list, it just means they didn't demonstrate that their products were safe by February 8th, 2 months from the eclipse. But that I haven't seen test reports that indicate that there are dangerous solar filters out there. And anyway, you'd have to be a nut to sell dangerous solar filters, because especially for an American eclipse where Americans are ready to sue anybody, right? We're a litigious society. Probably got more lawyers per capita than anybody else. You'd be foolish to sell unsafe products.
Totality Talks is brought to you by TexasSolarEclipses.com, where you can get the book Texas Solar Eclipses. Learn about solar eclipse safety, the total solar eclipse in Texas of 1878, how technology influences our experience, and citizen eclipse science then and now. That's TexasSolarEclipses.com. Click the link down below.
So I have one question. Am I involved with the Citizen Continental American Telescope Eclipse Project, the CATE project? I'm helping with 4 teams here in North Texas. What other citizen science projects? That's one of the things that I was really excited to see in 2017, excited to see this eclipse, just all the citizen science projects that are out there. Can you name a few of those, maybe your top 3?
Yeah, well, so Citizen CATE is one of the big ones. That was started in 2017 at the National Solar Observatory, and the idea there was to equip people all along the path of totality with identical equipment to take images and videos of the sun so that they could track the behavior of the solar corona over the hour and a half that it took for the eclipse to cross the country. This time, it doesn't take quite as long, but I think it's still more than an hour, maybe. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's more than an hour. But if you also position people in Mexico and in Canada, you get a good long swath of territory over which the moon's shadow passes, over the course of an hour. And the corona will change over that time. It doesn't change noticeably in the few minutes that you're watching totality. Sometimes the prominences do change noticeably during that few minutes, but the corona being much larger, you don't notice changes in it that quickly. But the corona is going to look different in Maine than it looks in Texas, because it's dynamic. It's in motion. So Citizen CATE will be looking for changes in the corona, and trying to understand. The ultimate goal there is to understand, what forces are at work in shaping the corona, and what kinds of things can we learn about how solar energy is propagated out through the corona into the solar wind and through the solar system by watching the behavior of the corona during the eclipse. There's another similar program that's where it's not using identical equipment, the Eclipse Mega Movie. This was also done in 2017. This is people using ordinary digital cameras and telephoto lenses. And they've even got a version of it where people can take pictures with their smartphones and things. The idea just being to basically crowdsource imagery of the eclipse from all across the country and put together a similar type of movie of the corona and how it changes over time. Citizen Kate is looking very close in at the inner corona. Mega Movie has a wider field of view with telephoto lenses instead of telescopes, and so it'll complement the Citizen Kate project with images of the middle and outer corona. And then there are a couple of projects that are looking at environmental changes. Eclipse Soundscapes is recording sounds of animals, insects, birds, things like that, to try to really get a handle on how a variety of different kinds of species behave at the beginning and middle and end of totality. And Light Sound uses a light meter to track how dark it gets, and as the light is changing throughout the eclipse. But it also it was originally designed not necessarily to collect data, but to sonify the eclipse for people who are blind or of low vision. The idea behind a Light Sound device, which is something that you can actually build yourself with off-the-shelf hardware, is to translate the light levels into sounds. The lower the light, the lower the pitch of the sound. And so what you can do, and I'm planning to do this myself, is you can hook your Light Sound up to a computer and it'll record the light levels and produce a graph of the rise and the fall and the rise of the light. But it will also, if you connect it to a speaker, it will play a sound. And as the light level falls, if there are any people who are blind or low vision in your group, they can, if they're near the speaker, they can hear the light level change, right? They can't see it, but they can hear it. So those are two interesting projects. There's a ballooning project again to take pictures of the umbra on the ground. This is run out of Montana State University. So students are building little cameras, lightweight cameras, to go up on hot air balloons and take pictures of the umbra and the penumbra on the surface of the Earth from about 100,000 feet up. That was also done in 2017. And there's at least 9 or 10 different projects. Those, I think I've mentioned 5 now, that are being done. And in fact, at the American Astronomical Society summer meeting, we're going to have a special session to hear preliminary results from all of these projects.
Ooh, I may have to go to that. I may have to go to that one. Where is it?
It's in Madison, Wisconsin.
Madison,
Wisconsin. Yeah.
Well, there's also the Solar Wind Sherpa group from the University of Hawaii that is setting up several teams up through the path. And they also launched, I believe, in 2023 in Australia, and they're trying to do it again. And I think they're going to do that in Arkansas or someone else. That's an interesting project. Yeah,
Shadia Habal, who's a solar physicist at the University of Hawaii, she has a team that she pulls together for each total solar eclipse. They do all kinds of scientific measurements. They do extremely high resolution photography using different kinds of filters to isolate different kinds of emission within the corona and the chromosphere. And they routinely publish really good and interesting papers in the scientific journals in the couple of years after each eclipse. One of the sad things about this eclipse is that Another group run by astronomer Jay Pasakoff is no more. At least, well, Jay died in the fall of 2022, but he and Shadia were the two principal people who put research teams together on the ground. And I don't know if anybody's picked up Jay's mantle, but I know Shadia is still going strong.
At his college?
He's at Williams College.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the college or anywhere else. I mean, he's got international collaborators, but I don't know. I mean, Jay was a master at getting funding for this group.
Yes.
You know, he had relationships with National Science Foundation, with National Geographic Society, and with him not around anymore, I don't know if anybody from that team has been able to get the funding needed to keep the team together and traveling to eclipses. That would be
a shame, because he did so much work on so many of those people that he took with him onto go see an eclipse, and everything else just became stars within astronomy and science and space. That's right. He's got a huge legacy of students who are in astronomy now, doing research, and some of them doing solar eclipse stuff, because he taught at Williams College for many decades. But there are other projects too. NASA is. I'm pretty sure NASA is sending a couple of airborne expeditions up, especially instrumented airplanes, get above more of the atmosphere so that you can look at the sun in the ultraviolet and the infrared in addition to visible light, things of that sort. But it's different today. It used to be in past centuries that in order to study the solar corona, you had to wait for an eclipse. There were some instruments that you could use on the ground that included what's called a coronagraph that blots out the bright sun and lets you see the corona from the ground. But because of how bright the sun is and because of the way optics work, you had to blot out a much bigger area than just the sun's bright face. And so you never could see the inner corona with a coronagraph, only the outer corona, the middle and outer. But now we have spacecraft in orbit that are monitoring the sun 24/7. Never gets dark on them. And so, you can see pictures from the Solar Dynamics Observatory or the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory or several other solar observatories in space on the internet. Every day you see the sunspots moving, you see the flares happening, you see the corona. So you don't have to wait for an eclipse to do solar physics anymore. So that's why there aren't that many people doing experimentation during solar eclipses. But that's one reason why I'm actually more interested in the citizen science, because these armies of people collecting all kinds of data all along the path of different types, atmospheric response, biosphere response, images of the corona, that's really new. And that's not something that we've seen until 2017, really. And now it's become a big deal, and there's more and more of these projects with every eclipse. Well, and the equipment's gotten cheap enough that you can do something like that. You can spin up 39 teams.
Right, exactly.
And put them all along the path. Because the optics have come down. The camera on ours is like this big.
Right. Little tiny cameras with large chips.
And PCs.
The computers.
We're basically, the program's basically giving away the whole sat for local outreach after the eclipse.
Right. Digital technology, which is the computers, the imaging, telescope control, all the rest, plus the fact that really high quality telescopes are now very affordable, means that the capabilities in the hands of amateurs today are as good or better than the capabilities that were in the hands of professionals a generation ago.
Exactly. So at the task force, you said that there were over 1 million people traveling to get in the path. Have those numbers changed at all?
Yeah, I was being really conservative if I actually said over 1 million. In 2017, this NASA survey that the University of Michigan did showed that more than 20 million people traveled for the eclipse, but only about 8 million of those traveled into the path. And this is, again, this problem of people thinking that getting closer to the path is as good as getting into it. So Michael Zeiler of Great American Eclipse, who is a geoinformation systems genius, he has made projections, which you can see on his website at greatamericaneclipse.com, of how many people are likely to travel into the path of totality in each of the 13 states that the path crosses. And he's got a range. And he's predicting that based on his look at population statistics and highways into the path and all of that, he's ballparking that 4 million people will travel into the path. I maintain, and we'll of course find out on April 8th, that he's vastly underestimating the number, because 8 million people traveled in 2017. And this time the path goes through many more big cities. There are many more interstate highways that lead in and out of it. So it's possible that he's not underestimating it because of the time of year. August 2017 was the middle vacation season, so people are a lot more willing to travel, right? And this one's a work day. I mean, that one was a work day too, but it was during the summer when school wasn't in session. This time it's a work day during the school year. So maybe fewer people will have the opportunity to travel. Nevertheless, because there's so much more population in the Northeast than there is in the parts of the, where the path of 2017 went, I think it's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 million. I hope I'm right. If I'm not, and if Great American Eclipse is right that it's 4 million, that's still a lot of people. There's about 32 million people who live in the path already. So it's going to be a big event.
More should see it.
I mean, I hope people will travel because it's worth it. You will never regret having gotten into the path of totality, but you will certainly regret it if you wished you had and you don't, because the next eclipse that's crossing the U.S. is not until 2045. If you missed 2017, you only had to wait 7 years, but now you're going to have to wait 21.
Or travel,
right.
Oh, well, we had put that question in there, and I'd like to revise it because I think it was not 1 million people traveling into the path. It was 1 million people traveling to Texas to get into the path.
Oh,
okay. Yeah, Texas definitely has the best prospects because for having people come, because it also has the best weather prospects in the U.S. That's the other difference is in August. It's summer and the weather is really good, and most of the path was predicted to be clear. And in fact, most of the path was clear. This time around, once you get out of Texas, you're getting into the midsection of the country and the Northeast, and the path comes through New Hampshire. I could just drive an hour north and be in the path, but on April 8th, most years it's still winter here. We've had blizzards in early April, so I'd rather be in Mexico where it's much more likely to be clear, or Texas. I have a sister-in-law who lives in Dallas. She's right on the path, so a lot of our family is going to collect there in Dallas. I have a son who lives in Maine within the path, so he's going to stay put, and with any luck, he'll see it. I noted that this past year, in 2023, on April 8th, it was beautifully clear in New Hampshire, and all of New England was beautifully clear. And Texas actually had clouds. So, we say climate is what you expect, but weather is what you get. So we're hoping that everybody will have clear skies on the 8th of April. and that the climate statistics will have not been a good guide. But because climate data tells you that Texas looks more promising, more people, if they're going to go to Texas.
So we talked about it a little bit earlier, but about the sun being at near solar maximum. Has solar maximum, I read earlier that solar maximum passed just recently, and then I read that they changed that idea. Do we know when solar maximum is going to be?
You don't know when solar maximum is going to be. You only know when it was. Okay, so there's different predictions for when it's going to peak. The predictions that were published before this current solar cycle indicated a peak in 2025. But the cycle seems to have ramped up a bit faster. It seems to be going higher, more sunspots. And now the revised predictions are for this year, 2024. Whether it's early in the year, middle of the year, later in the year, we won't know till 2025, 2026. Until it's definitely going down, you don't know when the peak actually was. But the point is that the solar activity is near the peak. And that means that the corona will be really beautiful. During solar maximum, the corona rings the entire sun. During solar minimum, you tend to get nice equatorial streamers, but not a whole lot of activity at the sun's poles. But as the 2023 April eclipse in Australia showed, near solar maximum, you've got activity all the way around the sun, and it's really spectacular. So we could have a really spectacular corona and a lot of prominences and a beautiful chromosphere. So there's every reason to think that it'll be a particularly stunning eclipse. Also, it lasts much longer than the 2017 eclipse. This is the longest eclipse since 2017. So It's going to be a good one.
It is.
Yeah, this has been a great time. Learned a whole lot, and just great listening to you talk.
Do you still think I'm an Ikigai?
I think so.
Do you still think I'm an Ikigai?
I still think you're an Ikigai. I still think you're an Ikigai. I really do.
Yeah.
I think you're doing what you love and are passionate about it, and you get to do it. Well, you used to be able to do it for a living. Now you're doing it as a hobby.
Right. Well, I've always done it as both. And I'm still doing some freelance writing. I just submitted an article to Sky and Telescope that'll appear on their website next week about just how dark does it get during an eclipse. I got a couple more things coming as well. But yeah, I look forward to really being retired. I have 4 grandchildren, 2 of whom are one of whom's 1 year old and one of whom was just born. And so, you know how people, they say somebody, left their job to spend more time with their family, and then you wonder, well, what was the real reason? Well, the main reason I want to retire is to spend more time with my family. My family's growing. I've got these wonderful little grandchildren that I want to get to know, and they're scattered from Southern California to Northern Maine. So I have to plan trips if I want to see them, and I want to see them.
Yeah. Well, that's a very strong bond. I have several girlfriends that were very professional, high up VPs of companies and everything else. That first grandchild was born, they were retiring and moving to where the grandkid was. I mean, it was just, the bond is strong there. The force is strong.
It's very strong. It is. It's very exciting. And, because, well, I don't know what it's like for everybody, but for me, sometimes I have trouble remembering what it was like to have little kids, because it's been so long. My kids are all in their 30s. But then when you get grandchildren, it all comes back to you and you realize, this is what life's all about, So still planning to chase eclipses, but on my own time. And I'm glad that when the AAS needs to spool up another solar eclipse task force, that I won't need to be serving on it, because, like I said, I've done my 10 years. It's been great. Met all kinds of wonderful people. Really enjoyed sharing, what I know and learning what other people know through all the workshops that we've done. But it's It's a lot, and I'm getting kind of worn out. But I've got my observatory. I'm planning to spend more time in my observatory, and less time sitting in front of my computer.
Well, maybe your next one, as Kate Russo puts it, it can be a me eclipse. Just about.
Yeah, exactly. A me eclipse.
And you don't
right.
anyone.
Right. Well, one great thing about eclipses is if you're chasing them, you're going to all kinds of interesting and exotic places. But if those are the only places you go, there's a lot of other places that you miss. And so we want to start filling in some of the gaps, places where there haven't been eclipses recently and we haven't gotten to go.
Well, I just want to say one thing, and that's thank you for all you've done. As somebody who had been attending conferences with the AAS, trying to get the word out on solar eclipses and everything else, and the efforts that I'm trying to do more on outreach here in my own state, the support from the AAS has been just wonderful. The Eclipse Ambassador Program, which you guys are working with the ASP on, all these other things, they've just been wonderful in helping me get the word out locally.
Great. Well, glad to hear that. And it really has been a privilege to be part of this community and to see everybody pulling together. And I have every reason to believe that April 8th will be a really great day throughout the country and in Mexico and in Canada. And with any luck, millions and millions and millions of people will be bitten by the eclipse bug.
Yeah. I hope so. Then they'll understand me. Nobody understands me.
I know. There is that problem. What are you talking about? It gets dark for a few minutes. It gets dark all night, day after day, No, this is a little different.
Yeah. Well, it's been a fantastic time. Thank you so much for doing this. And
we appreciate your time.
Well, you're so welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
We should have T-shirts out soon, so we can't pay you, but we're going to try to send you a T-shirt.
Okay. I like T-shirts.
Good.
Especially Eclipse T-shirts. In fact, most of my T-shirts are Eclipse T-shirts.
Yeah.
I get souvenir T-shirts on my tours. Yeah. And so I've got a lot of those. Oh, by the way, here's an interesting fact. I got contacted by a potato chip company in Ohio that's on the path. And they decided they wanted to make special Eclipse chips. Okay, Eclipse chips. And so they have a white cheese and pepper flavor of Eclipse chips. These are potato chips. The white and the black, of course, are meant to represent the sun and the moon. And the package has one of my Eclipse sequences wrapped around it. So
nice.
I've got my photograph on potato chips, and I got paid in potato chips, which
awesome.
Works for me because I love potato chips.
That's awesome.
So
that's awesome.
I think it's called Tiffin, if I'm not mistaken. Tiffin. Tiffin in Ohio, I think is the name of the company. Yeah, you can Google it.
That
Eclipse
awesome.
chips.
I'll Google of them. I'll go.
Yeah.
I'm trying to do something similar, but we'll see how it turns out. I'm trying to do wine.
Yeah. Wine and beer have both been done in the past. Angela Speck, one of the co-chairs of our Solar Eclipse Task Force, has an Eclipse beer named after her.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I know there's an Eclipse beer here in Texas because I've ran into it. And then we're just trying to get a label put together and just label up some wine for that. We'll see how that turns out.
Yeah. And of course, there's Corona beer. Yeah, there's Corona beer, which is the traditional post-eclipse celebratory drink. And if you get clouded out, it's the post-eclipse drown your sorrows drink.
And you put your finger over the Corona on the label.
Yeah.
Cloud out.
All right. Well, thank you both very much. I enjoyed this, and we're all looking forward to April 8th.
Clear skies.
Clear skies.
Okay. All right. You too.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Well, that's it for this episode of Totality Talks. Hope you enjoyed our chat with Rick. We thank him for joining us and, more importantly, for his leadership in solar eclipse safety and his unpaid guidance heading up the Solar Eclipse Safety Task Force for the American Astronomical Society. In our next episode, we chat with the go-to expert for eclipse climatology and weather, creator of the eclipsophile.com website, Jay Anderson. At 10 days out, the eclipse climatology is finally transitioning into actual weather forecast models. Jay provides insight on how to find and analyze weather forecast models for your potential observation sites. He actually saw the 2021 eclipse at sea, where most of us were clouded out. He is the clear skies guy. As always, clear skies.